Hello and welcome to our video series where we're getting into conversation with leaders in IT and Agile about subjects that they're passionate about. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Adam Hall. Adam is a keen Agile practitioner and enthusiast, very keen on empowering product teams by getting them to deliver smaller value, but more frequently. Adam works for A&D Digital, who build, guide, and teach organizations that want to accelerate their digital capability. So first and foremost, a very warm welcome. Adam, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here, Steve.
Delighted to have the conversation. And the subject today that we're talking about, or rather the title for this talk today, is the trouble with Gantt charts.
Yes.
So undoubtedly, anybody in IT, Agile or otherwise, is aware of a Gantt chart. So um, and probably might actually agree that there are some concerns with them in the first place. But let's kind of take the subject head on in the first place, and I'll hand straight over to you. So, what concerns you about Gantt charts?
What concerns me about Gantt charts? I'll tell you what. I'll take it to a story that happened just yesterday.
Okay.
And I'm sitting in a meeting with a lot of high up sort of stakeholders in an organization, large organization, and they're looking at the next 3 months and deciding, how we're doing, looking at a Gantt chart. And the first anti-pattern I noticed was this Gantt chart started 3 months previously. And that sort of gives you a little indication. Maybe this was written 3 months ago, and it's mapping 6 months in total.
Yeah.
And they were talking about something that would be delivered next month. And I looked at it and I thought, there's something about that doesn't feel right.
Mm.
And when we delved into it, it actually turned out that the delivery that they were expecting in November wasn't possible. And luckily, I could come up with data that showed that. I guess that's lucky. It's
Yeah.
kind of an uncomfortable moment. We called
Yeah.
it a oh no moment.
Yeah.
And it really sort of went into what was this Gantt chart originally created to do?
Mm.
So I think Gantt charts, well, there's a lot of history, isn't there? So they were invented in 1915, I believe, or around that time, early 1900s, by Henry Gantt.
Yeah.
And that's to do project management. So he was trying to find ways to manage projects. It was used in World War One, which is
Yeah.
great.
Quite.
But they've become this way of giving people confidence that things are okay. And actually, what I like to do in organizations is help them understand what's not okay, the sort of uncomfortable truths behind what's going on in projects. A lot of the things we do in software development is knowledge work, and it's very hard to estimate with certainty when things
Hmm.
are going to be delivered.
Yeah.
And I think Gantt charts give you a sort of feeling that it's not that uncertain, it's very clear, it's very concise. When in reality, these things just aren't as easy as that. So, I mean, taking it back to this example in the financial institution I'm talking about, there was this thing they called a milestone. And well, I'll ask the question of you, what is a milestone?
Uh, so it's a marker to tell you how far away from something you are.
Exactly. To tell you how far away you are from something. Yet, for some reason in project management, we use milestones to sort of tell us when we are getting a thing. So
Mm.
milestones, yes, you look at milestones and they tell you how far away you are from London, let's say. So
Yeah.
you've
Yeah.
got a milestone every mile, and you can measure your progress towards London by the frequency that you're passing these milestones.
Mm.
So they are a measurement of time passing, or at least distance passing, that you can extrapolate to time. And people using them to actually measure when we get nice things is a kind of like misuse of what a milestone actually is. And it is a very
Mm.
powerful way of measuring. But in Gantt charts, they're used to say, no later than this date, we want this thing. And I think that's a shame. And I think that's a common misconception in a lot of organizations.
Thank you. So I think to extend to that point for a second, if we imagine that if the thing that we were doing was completely linear, So let's imagine for a second we've got milestones along our train track. And okay, let's say we're in Germany rather than in
Yeah.
the UK here. We've got very efficient trains that are arriving at a point in time. Then with a completely predictable system like that, then using a milestone in that way may be accurate. It still may not be the right thing to do, but it may be accurate because there's a known quantity. The point you're kind of describing here is that we're treating a system where there isn't a known path
Yes, exactly.
as if there is one in the first place. So a false sense of security, I guess.
Yeah, and I'd love to take it back to the trains. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, how the trains have become a bit more predictable and reliable since people have gone into lockdown, because now the train companies don't have to deal with humans getting on and off trains. So actually the cause of delay seems to be humans a lot of the time, which
Okay.
is,
Yep.
a nature of the beast. So things are much more predictable when you take humans out of the equation. But humans are what you want in your organizations. Let's not get rid of the humans. Let's embrace the fact that we've got these people, and think about how we can efficiently plan projects to get things completed quicker.
So just a thought for a second, just around the visibility element, because I've definitely used Gantt charts in my career. Whether or not I've used them to provide a kind of false witness to what's really going on, you'd have to ask the
Yeah.
clients and the teams that I was working with. But there was very definitely a value in providing something visible and visual, because
Yes.
as much as I deeply disagree with the concept of reducing complexity, because that's a misnomer for me, the idea
Yeah.
of being able to provide a model to allow you to talk about the complexity and therefore providing something visible is useful.
I'm a big believer. Yes. And so I think that's what Gantt charts should aim to be to begin with. It's a way of sort of putting a line in the sand and going, this is what I believe will happen in the future. And it's a single person's view or maybe a team's view, but it shouldn't end there. So, like taking the example I had before, it was a Gantt chart that was created 3 months ago. And that's your first warning sign. If it's tracking anything from the past, then it's probably already inaccurate. A colleague of mine said, was that more than a week ago? Well, probably the information is out of date. And I think Gantt charts tend to live much longer than, a few weeks. It's definitely looking at longer term visions. I mean, one of the things is we are using Gantt charts to organize complexity. I mean, I'd love to show you
Yeah,
some
please.
examples of Gantt charts I've
Yeah, by all means.
selected from the web. We've got an example here, and this is showing the easiest path from A to Z, going through all the different stages in a project. And
Yeah, yeah.
actually, this is merely being used here to work out how long something is going to take, given predicted estimates around various tasks.
Yeah.
Some of them take longer, some of them take shorter, and you can use this to calculate the amount of time. But really, all you're saying is this is a to-do list. This is a to-do list where some things are harder than others.
A dependent to-do list.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And it looks very waterfall. Gantt charts have been used in waterfall software development for a long time.
Yeah.
Here's a slightly more complex one. And here you're seeing all
This one of
sorts of
mine.
teams. I mean,
Sorry, Adam.
what I love about this is just the fidelity. There's lots and lots of information on there, which is good. Almost too much information. I mean, we've got things which are part days represented in this chart, but then other things which span multiple weeks, some even months. So there's a lot going on here. And when I boil down what a Gantt chart is doing, we've got the milestones, we've got the tasks that show dependencies, and maybe we've got the sort of dependencies in between teams. But I like to look at how we actually represent the information we're trying to represent. So 25% of the information is talking about the tasks that we have to do. We've got 15% of the information talking about the teams that are applied to the tasks in this particular Gantt chart. And over 60% of the information is talking about time and the time that tasks will start, when they end, and when their dependencies are. But actually, when you break it down, the 60% is just the grid that we're representing time and work items on. It's kind of like administrative, surroundings. It's like a form to fill in things. So when you actually look at how much is represented by the actual tasks on that, it's just 8%. So we've got 60% of this trying to show something about dates. Dates are uncertain, and actually 8% is representing the things that are on there, the dependencies between tasks. So you've got such a tiny amount of the graph dedicated to the one thing you do want to know, which is the interdependencies of work between teams. And so that's my fundamental flaw. Now, because there's all this pomp and ceremony and sort of, things are very accurately and neatly laid out, I believe that it forces people to just accept it. So you look at a Gantt chart and you think, yes, that looks right. When in reality, you shouldn't be accepting things. You should be nervous about the fact that these things are not set in stone. Dates are uncertain. So I think a Gantt chart is a good starting place, but it doesn't really help a team talk about how you solve the problems that it's representing. I don't know, people move things around a Gantt chart and they think, yes, I'm a legend. Look at me, I've solved this. We can move this team and this team and this team and everything just works. When in reality, moving a task from one team to another, it shouldn't take the same amount of time. Like, teams do not just pick up work and deliver them in exactly the same time, especially in knowledge work.
That's kind of the point. And I love the example or the comment you made earlier about the trains, because we have got inherent systemic uncertainty in here. We want human beings doing things, and especially in environments where we're doing things that perhaps at least no one has done in this way in the world before, even if I'm sure an engineer at some point has written a bit of code like that to do a function like that.
Yeah. But
not in this environment, not integrated with these things, and not working with the colleagues that they are right now.
Exactly.
So the uncertainty in all of this stuff is vast. I'm just wondering, just a thought popped into my mind, and I was wondering if I'd done this actually as a bit of self-reflection too, of when I have had a Gantt. Let's imagine you start with a Gantt, right? And you're using that as your way of articulating what needs to be done and dependencies and how things work. Do we actually, on the basis that that's probably wrong, and even if you start with it wrong, do we ever take the time to actually have a look and see whether or not there was anything that we could learn from what we've just done? I know David Snowden and others would worry about looking backwards anyway, because the world's changed. So what does that really matter anyhow?
Right.
But I'm just wondering about if you took a Gantt chart and you used it as an experiment. I think it's going to take us 3 months to do this thing. I think this is how it will work. Is there value in then kind of looking at that to say, we were right, we were wrong? How wrong were we? Yeah. Does that teach us anything about our capability as a team, let's say?
And I think there is value in reflection and sort of constantly looking at the data to see what it's telling you. But there are much better ways to do it now. So, one of the big tools being used in organizations is JIRA. And if you're using something like JIRA, you have a sort of a reference of every task that's moved through a team in the past, how long they take. And if you're doing some sort of estimation, you can get an idea of actually how accurate those estimations are. And that can feed charts that then tell you and map the thing that you really want to know about, which is, am I going to get this thing on this date? Which is essentially what Gantt is all boiling down to. When do we get our nice new features? Perfect example, and I'm hoping everybody can empathize who's got family. So Fortnite, one of my kids loves playing Fortnite.
Yep.
And in the most recent season, if you level up to level 100 before the end of the season, you get a nice new skin, which is great. And he really wants it. But he's actually got quite stressed because he doesn't know if he's going to be able to get to that level in time. And so I helped him. Let me just bring up my screen. I helped him not by creating a Gantt chart, but by using Isaac's burnup chart for Fortnite. And as you can see on here, we're mapping his levels as he goes through. And so the stress for him was, am I going to get there on time? And the answer is, I don't know. You can't know. And I can't tell him everything's going to be okay. But what I can say is if he's, playing the way that he's playing, then he can definitely get there given this, this estimation. And then more recently, he hasn't been playing, which means if he carries on not playing, which would be great for me because I don't hear the screaming and the shouting.
And you actually get to see your son. Yeah,
yeah,
I know that
exactly.
feeling. Yep.
But he won't actually get it before the season ends. And guess what? This season ends date, that's not official. That's a guess based on somebody's estimation online. So we're dealing with uncertainty here. I can't say for certain when he will get his level 100 skin, but I can help him track it. And then it's up to him. Like, does he focus on that, or does he focus on some of the other wonderful things that he wants to do as a child, like riding his bike? And that's up to him. But what I can do is I can show him the information and I can help him sort of, focus if he needs to, and if not, that's fine. And I think this works in organizations as well. So here's another example of a release burnup, exactly the same thing. Do we get the thing on sprint 12? Well, no, you don't, not based on the ideal velocity. And right now we're looking around sprint 9 and we're trying to decide, okay, is it going to be, when is it going to be that we get to this bit? But the most important thing with this chart is, yes, the completeness changes over time. So over here, they found out that more was needed in the project. So they added more effort to get it complete. Over here, guess what happened? Christmas. You don't work during Christmas. And actually, Gantt charts aren't particularly good at showing those times when actually work will be stopped. They show bars, and bars seem to take 2 weeks. And these 2 weeks bars, therefore, it should be delivered in 2 weeks, apart from Christmas. So it's harder to communicate these things.
Yeah. Just thinking in this space, so I've got a number of questions because there are levels of Gantt chart, of course. So maybe I'll come back to that in a second, because there are some that people, it isn't just bars. They spend hundreds of hours making, allowing for things like that, and workforce patterns and all those kind of things. But it's just thinking, just looking at that burnup chart there, if you gave that to an executive somewhere, or at least some that I've worked in the past, they would read that as if it were a Gantt chart. I would say, yes, I can see my date in the future. You're not going to hit it right now. So I'm making the same conclusion looking at that as I would have done if I'd looked at a Gantt chart telling me that I hadn't quite reached my date yet.
Yes. So, but the thing is are you going to change on scope, which is within your control? Are you going to try and influence the team in some way by changing the way they work? That's a way. What you can't do is change time. Time is not something that can be manipulated. Humans, we are influenced. The way we work may improve things, but actually that is a slower boil. But reducing scope is the best way to get something to be delivered earlier. And I think what Gantt charts tend to do in organizations is they make us take on these big batches of work and these large bets. And they train us not to think about Monte Carlo simulations. What's the best possible scenario? What's the worst possible scenario? Even if your accuracy of estimation was, let's say, 1 in 6, like there's 1 in 6 chance of not hitting that estimate. Well, that is the same as playing Russian roulette. So do we really want to hand out little handguns to each of the executives saying, okay, you're ready to take the bet?
Yeah.
I mean, it's It's all about using the data that you do know, which is the frequency and the velocity of the work we have completed in the past, and using that to show, okay, this is what we could get to, but if this date is the fixed date, then what can we remove to actually deliver something on that date? It comes down to the iron triangle of, scope, time.
Well, that's time. Yeah, time, cost, quality. Do you mean of
Right, yeah.
Because I always thought scope formed like another point. So
it's a 3D triangle.
Well, exactly, but yeah, I think the word we're struggling for is square. Sorry, but but the point, but that was the sacrificial thing here. If you, on the basis you can't fiddle with time unless certainly in some of the IT contracts I've been involved in, you actually went and renegotiated and changed that. Right, that doesn't move very easily. Cost, then you've got the false fallacy here about throwing in people and throwing in resource that will speed stuff up, of course, which we know doesn't. But then quality, the quality wasn't the same as scope, because it was almost, that was the cutting corners part of the triangle, was kind of how I always understood that. Rather than saying, we just won't deliver this feature or this capability won't arrive by that date, but you'll have everything else. Rather, it was, still got a little bit of everything, but it's not done to the right level of fidelity.
Yes. Yeah, I always worry about that sort of let's be okay with allowing people to cut quality. It's not something I would ask of a surgeon, and I don't think we should be asked as knowledge workers either.
Like, can you fit me in if you do my operation at a lower standard?
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I agree. Can I, because I know, I mean, there may be some people watching this who kind of disagree with my assessment that I've just made there of the time, cost, quality stuff. But to just step back a second, if what we're really trying to do here is deliver value, then where in any of this conversation, whether it be the burn down chart or burn up chart or otherwise, or cumulative flow or a Gantt chart, where do we see the value that's actually being derived for a stakeholder turn up?
Yes, yeah. And well, so value is delivered once something is released to a stakeholder, once something is delivered. And that goes back to, my original introduction. What I love to do with teams is to get them stop thinking about this big batch and start thinking, okay, so what's the smallest, tiniest thing that we could give to the customer? And that customer might be an internal customer as well as an external one. But what's the smallest thing we could give to them to prove progress towards the bigger thing? So yes, we do need big long-term goals. I'm not against them, but we can break them down into small deliveries and actually prove those assumptions along the way. I mean, what the customer that I'm talking about at the beginning works in financial services. So actually getting through the regulatory pieces to actually get something live takes a long time. But to me, that looks like something that should be tackled frequently, often, and in smaller increments, so that you get good at doing it rather than doing it once, because you'll only ever then learn once and then you disband the team because it's been going on so long. Whereas if you're releasing small things more frequently, you kind of get good at those route to live activities, which are the plague of all sorts of organizations. And I think there'll be, people listening to this out there who are like, yeah, but we can't release early. Well, a lot of organizations have the same problem, and you've just got to confront them head on. You've got to work out how to get good at this route to live activities.
I would agree. I'd agree, and I think this is a misunderstanding or a missed opportunity, at least. Probably that's a better, less contentious phrasing. If you've got a team at the end of an iteration, let's say, they should be able to answer the question, in my opinion, what value have you delivered to a stakeholder in this iteration?
Yes.
And that value can't be we've just built something or we've continued to build something, The answer we're really
Yeah.
looking for is someone's life is better because of something we did in this last iteration.
Yes. Yeah. I like that.
But that's where you've got the challenge a little bit with, as you say, with release times. A client I'm doing some work with right now, they've got very long. Again, it's regulatory. It's always regulatory, right? Of course. Which of course doesn't actually mean that we can't do something. It just means that there are necessary standards to reach. Of course, fair enough. We agree with that. But because it's such a long cycle, it's triggering the behavior that they are now trying to put so much into a release
Yeah.
that instead of just delivering that small increment, to actually get some intelligence as to whether or not this is valuable for a customer anyway, or valuable for a stakeholder,
Yeah.
they're just racking up this thing.
Yes. It happens all over the place.
I know, but it's such a shame, isn't it? It's we've got a team working in supposedly working in Scrum who aren't delivering any value at the end of an iteration anyway, because they
Yes.
can't deliver value at the end of an iteration because the rest of the system here is stopping them, which means they're just effectively building up a pile of stuff that may or may not be any good.
Exactly. So it's the difference between iteration and increment. So an increment is something that gives you something better at the end. Some value is released, but an iteration is like, this is just a little bit of a bigger thing. And actually, okay, even if we can't change that in an iterative environment, you've got that timer every 2 weeks or however long the sprint cycle is, where you have another measurement and you can say, given all this past sprints that we've done, we are on course to hitting this thing later on. But so it does come down to, actually, I need to know that all of the things are slotting into place, all of these governance tasks, all of the testing. And a Gantt chart does show that. It does show how all the tasks interrelate to each other. And it also tries to apply this thing which I don't like, which is the dates. So I think a better visualization of the interdependencies is this diagram. Let me share my screen again. So here we have the PERT diagram. So this is developed by the US Navy Special Projects Office in 1957 to support nuclear submarine projects. And well, this particular one isn't a nuclear submarine project, but what you should be able to see is the dependencies on teams, the parallelization, like when can you actually start things together, or when could things be chained one after the other. And you should be able to calculate from this what the critical path is. So here, 4 days plus 11 plus 4 plus 9. You can also annotate a diagram like this much better. So you would have on PERT diagrams, there's a very complicated or complex way that you can actually visualize it, where you have specific fields for the date it starts, the date it could end, but what's the latest you could start it based on those criteria. So you can kind of like have a fuzzy way of looking at it. But what I like about the PERT diagram is it makes you think. And I like it's one of the techniques as an agile coach is to not quite draw the whole picture, but to leave the blanks for people to fill in. So somebody might look at this and go, well, why is it taking 11 days to travel to Mars? Don't you know about the thing? Whereas when you look at a Gantt chart, it's much harder to do that. It looks like all the job's been done for you, so you sit back. So I'm all about having engaging ways of leaning in and interacting with this. So this particular one was done as a mural board because it's deliberate. I'm trying to get people to move these things themselves, take ownership. That's another technique as Scrum Masters. We give post-it notes to people because it's ownership. So by holding these things in our hands, we can actually start to grow a connection of them, and the humans who then are holding them get to think, yes, this is my task. Like, how can I do this better? What can I change about this?
Yeah, that makes a good deal of sense. So I've kind of come back to the challenge in the first place, if I may, and do do correct me if I've misunderstood. What we're talking about here is that Gantt charts themselves, they're just a tool, like the PERT diagram you just showed there, or a burnup or otherwise.
Yes.
The challenge is far more the way that they are interpreted, and the
Exactly.
lazy way that they're interpreted by teams and by sponsors and so on in an organization, because they draw conclusions from them which are scientifically flawed, or that's probably too
Yeah.
strong a phrase, but they are flawed, whatever.
Yeah.
So you will always run into leaders, teams, project sponsors, program sponsors, and otherwise that are, for good or bad or otherwise, want to have some kind of a date. They want to know, they want some certainty to be able to say, this is when this thing is going to happen. If you've got a leader, for example, or an organization that's hell-bent on having dates and absolute deliverable dates in a thing, how would you go about kind of helping them to understand that the picture that's been drawn for them isn't necessarily true?
Yeah. So I think it's like we all go to our default sort of safe zone, and I think a Gantt chart is the safe zone to begin with. So let's say a leader has come to us, they have written a Gantt chart out, and this is what they want. What you've got to do is start using data and evidence to show how that might or might not be accurate, because it comes down to accuracy. And then you start using the visual. So, I work, luckily, I'm working at the moment with a large enterprise that has a lot of data
Yeah.
because of past projects. So I can draw on the past data, and I can create diagrams that show how similar projects in the past have panned out based on the estimations that have been applied to those things, and then how long they take. So cycle time, looking at how long things get from idea to definition of done, and use the data in a way that it's low barrier of entry. If you can link to a dynamic chart that's being updated all the time, then we don't have to have a weekly meeting where we're dragging our Gantt chart from left to right because everything slipped by a week again. It's about having an automatic way of visualizing the same data, because ultimately we all want the same goal. We all want that thing delivered. While I'm doing that, I like to try and slice off the pieces. So work with the product owners to find out what is it that we could deliver earlier. So let's say we had to deliver something next week, and challenge the teams to say, okay, well, what's that one thing we could deliver and who would benefit? So, talking about value, who's the thing that is going to be smiling at the end of this iteration? And what have we given them? One of the things, actually, here's a good technique to take away for your teams is for your next sprint, ask people in the sprint planning exercise, if you're working in sprints, to consider what are you demoing at the end. So rather than just what's the sprint goal, it's how are you going to demo it? Why is it going to be fun to watch that demo? And if you can't do that, then you're not delivering anything of value that people want to see, or you're not sort of empathizing enough with the stakeholder that wants it. So get into their heads, like, why do they want to see it? What are they going to see? Amazon do this for their releases. They create a press release and then work on the project based on the press release. And it's a good way to change that mindset to, this is the thing I've delivered, rather than these are the bits of work that I've done this sprint.
Entirely, because I just thought that you triggered a thought immediately about a Gantt chart as well, or at least the way that they're used, because I think I'll correct myself on that. Just the sense that that's the known path and the known detailed tasks that get us from A to Z.
Yes.
Where if you take the example of a vehicle, if I said to you, right, you need to make your car 5 miles an hour faster, well, fine, you could maybe tune a few things, take some weight out, and you achieve that. But if I said double the speed of your car, that's the aim we've got to get to. You have to be innovative. There's no clear path to that point. So it's almost like I can see what if you've I work a lot with outcomes with teams for exactly this reason, or with leadership teams and otherwise, because if you set some kind of goal which actually excites you, or in a really good way puts a tingle down your spine because it's, wow, that's ambitious or something.
Yeah, that's audacious.
Yeah, quite. Then you get
Yeah.
the opportunity to actually unlock the potential of your teams, where it's almost like the way that Gantt charts are used is the opposite. You're almost trying to find the upper limit of what they can do and draw a line across it.
Yes, exactly.
Rather than pulling people towards something. It's all about control of what you have, which is, even if the team could go faster than you've written in your Gantt chart, which is not often what necessarily we talk about.
No,
it's not what the plan says. I haven't got to get it done until Friday, or I haven't got to think of a different solution because we've got loads of time in it. Or we're introducing very mechanistic and uninspiring behavior.
Exactly. I mean, I love that thing. Like, who would you prefer to work for? Somebody who had decided exactly what you need to do when you need to do it, or the person who just tells you, I want this crazy thing, double the speed of the car. That's really, motivating. I'm not an engineer of cars, so I wouldn't be the right person for it. But I'm motivated to try and work with a team that's working on that.
Yeah, quite. There's immediately an inspiration to that kind of thing. I worry, just as maybe a last question or last area to touch on, I worry that while we're obviously in some vehement agreement about the fact that this is not about the tool itself, there are tools out there, whether it be work. I think Work Done's got one. Blah blah blah. There are loads of Gantt tools. The Atlassian suite has got some Gantt tools in it, I think. And
It does.
And maybe I'm wrong, but what's at the top of a safe diagram, if not a Gantt chart by another name, with some clear kind of milestones and destination points?
Yes. Yeah.
I wonder how we move the conversation for people along, because we continue to perpetuate the idea by providing that that's a good way to organize teams.
I mean, it's one of those things. People crave certainty, and what these tools are doing is they're giving you certainty in a way that they're going to get more customers for them. And I can use it as a means to an end. So, if we want to draw up a Gantt view in the latest version of JIRA with the nice road mapping software that they've created, yes, we can lay that all out. And now we've got all of the individual tasks that need to be done. But now let's take it into the real part of JIRA, the engine that actually tells you how frequently we are making progress on these things. Like, what percentage of it is complete? How do we get to the last 10%? I always find with these things, even on a Gantt chart, you've got something tracking over time. So if it's halfway through the project today, does that mean we're 50% complete? Or does that mean it just happens to be the midpoint of the project? I always find that the last 20% takes the longest time. Why is that? It's because it's very hard to estimate these things. And the easy bits at the end never turn out to be as easy as they should be.
No, well, quite. That's where you ram in all of the uncertainty that you pretended didn't exist at the beginning, if I'm being kind of disruptive for a second. Because exactly the last half is, oh my goodness, we've now got this deadline looming and someone's promised something to a client in a contract somewhere.
Yes. And it also tends to mean it's the time when you're starting to think about that next thing on the bar chart. So you're being asked to sort of discover or shape or estimate some next work.
Yeah.
One parting gift, actually, for leaders who are addicted to Gantt charts right now. Consider what it might be like to have to face yourself and tell you that actually that Gantt chart is wrong. And consider maybe the last time somebody did that, how did you react? And just think, like, was my reaction, did that help change the situation, or did it actually hinder it? Because I think that's the conversations you need to have. And if a Gantt chart is making it harder to have that conversation, just be aware of what that felt like last time it happened.
Thank you, Adam.
Yeah,
really grateful.
cool.
Thank you very
Steve.
much for the conversation. I really enjoyed that. I'll put some details in here about how people can contact Adam, and also how people can contact A&D Digital too. And I'll put the links into your Agile meetup too. I didn't mention that at the start, but
yes,
for people to be able to come along and join that session too. Anyhow, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.